I had recently led a crusade to dictate public morals. I was not known for my liberal views or my insistence on the independence of the judiciary. She was drawn to my metal file cabinets and my porcelain dinnerware. We both objected strongly to the widespread abuse of three-piece bistros. She had startling new scientific evidence that the papacy was involved. Together we saluted the...
Hello there, colleagues across town, across the globe, sports fans and ceiling fans alike. Here we are for another madcap edition of Public Affairs Public Access. I'm your host, Paul Colby. It's the 23rd of May in the year 2019 for you historians who are rendering this program on the media of the day. And we certainly don't know what that's going to be. But I can tell you what we're going to do here and now, and that's we're going to take a look at some things that are going on in that big wide world of ours that are being written about in books and articles, that are being satirized or celebrated in today's popular music, that are being fictionalized or patronized in today's movies and television programs, and that are being marketed or commented upon on the internet, where most of you are spending most of your time these days. But I bet you haven't caught up with some of the stories we're going to bring to you tonight, because that's what we always do on this show. We bring you the stories that nobody else will bring you. And so, I'd like to start at the top, so to speak, with some things in books and magazine articles and some newspaper articles that reflect what's going on in our world today, especially here in the new United States. That would be the place where Donald J. Trump is the president. And one of the books that is really having a spurt of growth lately because of Donald Trump's recent theatrics is the book called Making It Big in Trump's America. This is a book by Damian Flosshuter. You may remember him. He's responsible for the very popular How to Live Like a King on $65,000 a Day. You know, I think that's one of the most useless books that I've ever encountered, because all of us have a different version of what we do with $65,000 a day. But if you want to be like the POTUS, there are some tips in this book, and you know what? I'm going to share some with you so you don't have to spend $250 trying to locate a copy of this book. What he has to say here is, number one, you have got to stop reading if you want to be like the big guy. Stop reading and, for gosh sakes, dumb down that vocabulary of yours. Another tip he has, insult everyone you meet. Just make it a habit. When you see somebody for the first time, insult them. If you see people regularly, it's even better to threaten them, especially people who annoy you. So those are some of the main things that are given by way of advice if you want to emulate. But he has several principles which I think are worth mentioning. Number one, appearance is important. And that means that if you're not actually rich, you have to make it look like you're really rich. For example, he gives the let's call it protocol, or let's call it exercise, of having other people park cars in your driveway. He says that way it'll look like you have a fleet of cars, not just one. A friend of mine tried this. You know, he had an old Fiat and a Toyota and an old Ford truck and even a DeSoto and a tractor, but he got ticketed for, you know, having too many cars in the driveway. So that may or may not work. But what you're trying to do is to give the appearance of wealth. There is also point 2. You have to give branding to things. That's also important. Branding, put your name on something. For example, I don't know, the trash bins on your block, just put your name on all of them. Or if there are a bunch of sandwiches in the refrigerator in your lunchroom at work, put your name on all of those. You see what I mean? Branding. Of course, some of my friends have been getting in trouble for putting their name on other people's sandwiches, but that's beside the point. Another thing, you've got to realize that hyperbole is important. Hyperbole meaning everything that you touch or everything that touches you or everything you're involved with is the best ever. Even if you're talking about, for example, your stomach ache. I'll tell you what, a lot of this book, and there you have it. You don't have to spend a lot of money on the book, but I think the main point he makes is your office, whether it's an office in your home or your office at work, should be a mess, because that makes it look like you're an important guy who doesn't have time to clean up that big mess. So I've recently, I had a messy office to start with, so it's not like I'm emulating Mr. Trump. But while we're on this subject, let me just point out that there's also plenty of coverage in business-type magazines. Here's a current issue of Business Week that says Trump really, according to some bank officials, he's only really worth a couple of $100. And they, I'm not sure I understand. There was another article here I was kind of fixated on, talking about some hat fitters. You've probably heard that they're on strike these days, and they are worshiping a bunch of new gods with silly names. But anyway, like it says, Donald Trump is really only worth a couple of $100. He is, however, a hero mostly to some white male far-right figures here in these United States. He's heroic. And, these people seem to be more responsible for the upsetting trend of violence in this country than anybody else, not the immigrants, not the Middle East terrorists. No, it's white males. And there is a revolutionary interpretation of what's going on here. It's a book called The Causes of Far-Right White Male Hatred and Bigotry, Revealed. Now, I have to tell you, if you don't have time to read the book, I'm always trying, wow, this is mentioned in the Trump Lunar Motel. Or it's a hotel, actually. Anyway, I hadn't noticed that before. But do you know what it says? Mr. Wedbetter's book, it's Mr. Moon Putter. Mr. Wedbetter, that's his first name. Mr. Moonbutter says that the reason for all of this bigotry and hatred is the food some of these people are eating, these white males. For example, you wouldn't have thought the tofu in your refrigerator is potentially dangerous, would you? Well, it turns out a lot of if you have read the manifestos of some of these white male terrorist troublemakers, you'll notice that a lot of them are into tofu, and not only that, portobello mushrooms. Who'd have thought it? And, my hat's off to the doctor for discovering this, but I am not giving up parsley, even though he says it's also parsley that is causing this hatred and bigotry when these people start eating food different than the meat and potatoes that they used to be used to. Because of all of this kind of talk, one thing that is going around these days is a big discussion of what kind of food we should be eating. And believe it or not, there are some people, I've seen this guy on TV a lot lately, Dr. Barton Shue, who is talking about the non-food diet. Now, when he's on TV, it's not real clear what he's talking about. I mean, if you're not going to eat food, presumably you need something for sustenance, because you would still eat even if it weren't food. And this, when I thought about this, because nobody is really asking him other than softball questions, I tried to figure out what could he be talking about and what other trend out there might line up with this by way of explanation. Well, here's something I saw just recently in the Santa Clara Apologist. There are 500,000 miles of plastic waste here in these United States. Waste, or is it something that is potentially being used by, you know, our ever thoughtful industrialists and entrepreneurs, something that instead of reaching all the way to the moon and back, finds its way to our dinner plate? Do you think that's possible? Look, you heard it here first. I'm not saying it's already happening, but you did hear it first. Maybe you had some plastic food for dinner tonight and didn't even know it. Huh? Is that possible? Some of you feel a little funny down in the stomach, like it's the worst stomach ache ever? Okay. Another thing that's being talked about a lot these days, especially with the influence of the National Rifle Association, is arming teachers in schools. I know some of you don't think that's a good idea, and neither do I, but that's not the whole story. Apparently, there have been a couple of pilot programs, and the article here in the Center for the Study of Defective Institutions goes into this a little bit. On an experimental basis, somebody, and I'm not pointing a finger at anybody with the initials NRA or anything else, decided to arm the entire student body at a couple of junior high schools to see what would happen. And what happened was not exactly what they thought. They weren't able or willing to defend themselves or each other. What really happened was that a bunch of well-armed teenagers apparently went on some sprees. We would call them sprees. They, for example, overwhelmed the attendants at a convenience store. You know, a lot of the youngsters go there after school to get equipment with which to vape, or, you know, vaping. This day and age, I think the most popular thing is the impeachment flavor or scent or whatever you call it. Anyway, armed with all sorts of weapons, they simply took the whole inventory of vaping equipment. And there were a couple of other bad incidents here, but these were in the Goat River Basin, so it's probably not anywhere near where your kids are going to school. And I'm not going to say anything further about it. Maybe well-armed students is the look of the future. Because, for example, we talk about top-down, you know, as above, so below, and the people we have running our military and industrial complex these days are pretty interested in throwing their weight around. John Bolton has a new book right now. It's called Bomb Somebody Already. And, well, if we give him half a chance, he will. I just don't know what else I can say about this, except that his understudies in the cabinet or in the administration include Jared Kushner, and you probably heard that he has a peace plan for the Middle East, sort of a peace plan for the Middle East. Actually, it was called pretty ambiguous and nebulous by, you know, those liberal media sorts. But all that his peace plan really had to say was that, first of all, we should move the capital of the United States to Jerusalem. I'm not sure what that's supposed to accomplish, except showing whose buddies we are. And he also said to get the Palestinians to come around, he wants to give them all tickets to the Mets game. And I'm not sure how many of them even care about going to a Mets game. So there's not a lot of progress there. Where the administration thinks there's a lot of progress, and what they talk about all the time is the economy, jobs, 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 and more people having jobs than ever before. Well, one reason there's so many jobs in the job numbers is that some people have more than one job. They need more than one job because their jobs are, paying ridiculous wages, and there's no upward mobility, and it's mostly dead-end jobs, if you want to call them that, except that a few of them seem to be mood-based. Now, I was just looking at a chart put out by the Department of Labor Pains the other day, and this is talking about what some of the new jobs are that are available. For example, you could be a rap music translator if you were living in the Spokane area here, and you could make almost $2 an hour, okay? $2 an hour? I don't think that would pay for your vaping equipment. Or you could be a special needs bloviator if you're in Tucson, or you could be a blowtorch accessory quality assurance consultant. They apparently don't have enough of those in Reno. And personally, I'm looking for the jobs that actually do pay high wages, and that would be hairstyle commentary in the Brooklyn, New York area, or you might want to consider being a wastewater taster there in New Orleans. So yes, indeed, there are lots of jobs these days, but do you want them, or will you just continue to work in a fast food establishment where, you can get the leftover plastic and take it home with you? I got to say this, Democrats are in the news these days almost as much as the POTUS is. And that's because there's so many of them, and they seem to be trying to claw their way back into power. A new book on the subject, Where's the Party, by Mr. Cecil Bagg Pulse, talks about how the Democrats lost 420 pounds on the way back to the moon. I'm hearing a lot about the moon these days. I know some people want to go there. But anyway, this book, which is widely available, it was recommended by Genghis Khan, even though, as far as I know, he is no longer among the living. But the Democrats themselves, you see, after starting off on a track of opposing everything done by the Republican Party, have decided to scale back. They've all been talking about Medicare for all, but now they're talking about Medicaid for oil, because apparently once we started talking about a Green New Deal, that would be expensive and that could happen, there's been a backlash. And so now you have Democrats embracing Medicare for oil, an idea whose time has come and gone, and this is mostly the centrist Democrats who are. But excuse me now. While I'm talking about oil for a minute, have you noticed that Kinder Morgan is wanting to put a new pipeline through Central Texas? Yeah, all the way through Central Texas, where we have karst. Do you know what that is? K-A-R-S-T? That's that horrible limestone rock-type formation that's about 8 inches under the ground through a lot of Central Texas. That's why we have caverns and caves and things like that, where everything that goes down, for example, water, is pretty permeable. It just goes right through. And that means to say that if you had a pipeline and it was leaking, that would also go straight through and be in the groundwater. Now, a lot of the the people in Texas don't like this. And the legislatures in Texas, they always pay attention to what the people are talking about. And unfortunately, when they respond, they don't always do the right thing, because what we have right now in the current legislature is a new law that will allow entities like pipeline companies to get protesters of pipelines in jail or otherwise out of the picture. Some of the language in here really bothers me. I was just looking through the language of this proposal today. It says that that when people are talking about viable alternatives, including men and women of science who actually have training or education or credentials that entitle them to speak out, they can be harshly treated here. They can be instantly jailed. They can be assaulted with falsehoods in regional and national media outlets. They can be fined in an amount equal to their yearly income. You can see that our Texas legislators are not interested so much in protecting the people who don't want pipelines as the people who want to build pipelines. Anything new there? Well, no, kind of like that all over the place, isn't it? But anyway, let me get back to the Democrats. I strayed from the point. A lot of Democratic candidates right now. In fact, you saw pictures on cable network news recently about, more people lining up to be presidential candidates for the Democratic Party, and I mean a lot of them, a lot of candidates. And there's a reason that there's so many of them right now. The DNC has sent out a letter to people who want to be candidates, and the reason that we already have a couple of dozen Democratic candidates is that they're only going to let the first 30 declared candidates play in their, debate fantasy world coming next year, I guess. So that's why so many people are rushing to get in on it. As it says here, only the first 30 men or women who declare their candidacy are going to be allowed to participate in the debates. But the skirmishes have already started. And that means that the putative leader of the party, sort of by default, Mr. Joe Biden, is now taking a lot of flack. Shortly after he has declared that he wants to run, people are looking at his past. For example, when they were talking about tougher crime penalties, he was notorious for zeroing in on podiatrists and, quote, certain acrobats, unquote, and that became part of our national anti-crime legislation. We're still reeling from the effects of that. And at the time, he was talking about public whippings and things for the perpetrators of those kind of foot doctor-related crimes. Podiatric. I don't know. My producer's trying to correct my pronunciation. I'm trying to connect it to the real foot issues of our time. But another of the issues of our time that involves both the Democrats and the Trump who's in charge here is the trade war. The trade war in some books, for example, in the book by To Kill a Mockingbird, has been portrayed as a minor trade squabble. Well, if you've tried to buy, a washer dryer or a hair dryer or anything like that lately, you know that it's not necessarily inconsequential, the effects of this trade war. But me personally, I got a wake-up call right away. You see, I like to go down to my favorite Chinese restaurant for lunch at least a couple of times a week. Usually I find myself eating the egg drop soup, which has spare parts, and I never ask what those spare parts are. I don't really want to know. The green curry has some tofu byproducts, and they look plastic to me, but I'm not an expert. I occasionally will have the shrimp knuckles on toast. But and did you know, by the way, the waitresses at some of these places are under surveillance these days. I know that because I read the menu closely. But here's what happened. When I went this week, the shrimp knuckles that used to be a bargain at $6.95 are now $12.95. And that the egg drop soup that's my favorite is no longer available. I suppose because the spare parts are no longer available. So yeah, I see instant results of this trade war that are kind of messing up my perfect world. But you know what? Even at $16.95, I may have to try the twice humiliated pork with sideburns, because I've been reading a lot about food and the non-food diet, and apparently sideburns are probably going to be one of the wonder foods of the future. I'm not sure, but maybe some of the foods we already consume have sideburns. I don't think, when you read the labels, it's not clear to me that they have to list sideburns. Anyway, another aspect of the trade war, of course, is that the POTUS is now singling out Hawaii, the very big telecom giant from across the waters there, or across the continents, and he's trying to link Hawaii to a national security threat, because the government of China can always just, look over the shoulder of Hawaii employers, I guess. But this new promotion, no 5G for Gen Z, I don't really understand how this is getting any traction. I mean, the Chinese have the Great Wall, but lately it's Trump who is wanting to build a stone wall. Now, he really had a good time, of course, when he was going after a border wall. It turned into a giant issue for his base, all right? So now he apparently wants to really mine this and milk it, if you want to use that expression, by doing a stone wall. Part of this stone wall involves not giving any documents to the Democrats, who are now controlling the House, and not making available certain witnesses who could talk about what Big Don is really like, behind behind closed doors. But what's strange about this is the Democrats, in response to this stonewalling, they keep hoping that someone in that Republican Party is going to grow hair, or, in other words, is going to stand up to the Mr. Trump by, behaving like John Dean did when Nixon was president. And apparently, nobody that is close to the president, and nobody in the Republican Party for that matter, wants to be John Dean. The answer to the question? Well, you probably noticed this if you were watching the news tonight. Chairman Nadler has a way of getting the John Dean scene going, and that is he's going to have John Dean testify. Of course, John Dean doesn't necessarily know anything about the current White House except what he reads, but that'll be fine because we will have John Dean testifying. And, it was a long time ago that John Dean testified. It was almost as long ago as when we went to the moon, 50 years ago. And you see a lot of discussion right now about going back to the moon. Well, that's understandable. It's, I mean, we haven't been there in a long time. And so a lot of people are saying, what are we going to find when we go back? I sent my staff out there. You know, I have ways of getting information. And my staff brought me back a few pictures that are pretty darn surprising if you ask me. Yeah, they're pretty darn surprising. Let me tell you something about the moon. Yeah, the lunar taco hotspot, I understand, has some tacos that don't seem to be made out of any natural food product, but we've already discussed what could be behind that or under that or whatever. But what I have been reading a lot about these days is the really secret story of the Apollo program. And this is a new book by Darwood Sinker. If you haven't seen it, interesting, I hadn't noticed this before. He's with the Plastic Food Study Group of the University of Grief. I think that's in Ontario or something. In any case, this book is very fascinating. For one thing, it says that the very first Apollo craft were actually made of plastic, which is why it was dangerous trying to get them in orbit because they would melt. They would melt before they got into orbit. But the first successful Apollos, Apollo 1, 2, 3, I mean, you think you know Apollo 11 and 12 and so on and so on. The first Apollo missions went to Detroit. And I think that was because there was a pizza place there. I mean, it's unclear from this book, but I've heard other stories that some of the early astronauts on the Apollo program were really into pizza when it used to contain real food products. And so they simply had manual control of their Apollo spacecraft, and they would land in the Motor City for lunch. Okay, you think we haven't been to Mars yet? Well, people are they're talking about going to Mars, but I'll tell you what, we've already been there. Yep, we've already been there, and I'll tell you why. It's because accidentally, some of the early Apollo craft, which were, they were being piloted by an artificial intelligence of some kind. It was a robot or something. We're not real clear what it was. It wasn't a human being, but it accidentally went off course. One of them went to Mars and crash landed, and another one left the solar system. We don't know where that is. There are some other fascinating things in this secret history of the Apollo program. I don't want to spoil the book for you, but I highly recommend that you check out chapters 12 and 13, because chapter 13 is talking about John Dean and his role in the Apollo program, and also Donald Trump's role in the Apollo program, because he's apparently been to the moon a few times. He said it was the best trip he ever took, even though he had a stomach ache that was really bad. You know, that means that in the current race for president, you know, it's 500 days away, but they're already campaigning all the time. And so some of the candidates are trying to say, well, I haven't been to the moon, but I have been to Cleveland. Or I haven't been to the moon, but I do spend a lot of time in New Jersey. Things like that. Now, Bernie Sanders, of course, is famous for his honeymoon, and so he's saying he has been on a honeymoon, but that's different than the moon that's out there. So anyway, that's kind of a look at what's going on in political life. Books and articles, all sorts of things are being talked about, and I bet in that survey we just did, you probably heard some things that you didn't hear on the broadcast news channels because I'm watching out for you. I'm looking at everything that's going on here. So, let me just talk for a minute about new music, because that's a little bit more interesting for some of you to talk about. There's a new CD out by the artists who were formerly known as the Omaha Marching Band. They don't say what they're known as now, but their album is called Purple Grains, and it's going over very well, but most people haven't heard the rest of the CD, and I got to tell you, it's very interesting. You see, what these boys have done, and I think it's 13 boys and 1 or 2 girls, they've taken a bunch of popular music from the 60s, and then they have reworked it into songs about food and nutrition and health. Isn't that fascinating? For example, on this CD, one of my favorites is the reworked Beach Boys classic, Wouldn't It Be Rice? And there's the reworked Beatles classic, Can't Buy Me Loaves. And there's even a reworked Rolling Stones classic, It's All Over Easy Now. So if you like that kind of music, these are the boys for you. But a lot of you like some stuff that's kind of atmospheric. And the person for atmospheric music, is, if you're asking me, that would be Luna Puffy. And she's back with a CD that is really, I mean, it takes my breath away. I had to go to the emergency room. This is called What's With the Hole in Your Roof? And that's the title track, but it's not even my favorite one. She gets very personal on this record. So she's got a new classic that's getting some airplay, I'm Getting Over You, with the help of some new pharmaceuticals. It's a touching ballad. I mean, it actually comes right out of the CD, and it does touch you. I'm not sure how they do that, but see, that's the state of technology today. And I really like You Barbecued My Heart, and I'm going to sue you when this is over. And I also like Don't Confuse Me with Duck Music. I'm not sure what duck music is, really. But like I say, it's a very interesting album. Another thing, you probably haven't heard this, because if you're into rap music, then you probably prefer the stuff that's vacuous and not very thoughtful about women, and not very thoughtful about, a lot of things except being cool in whatever way you do it. But there is a new rap and hip-hop act that is trying to upgrade and bring more sophisticated, challenging concepts to popular music. So Flatus and Fluvia are the group that I'm talking about. Flatus and Fluvia sing everything in Latin. See, that's pretty cute, isn't it? I mean, that is about as sophisticated as you can get without, losing your audience completely. This new album is called Ego Sum Esurientes da Mihi Vestra Frumentum. Now, I know most of you haven't been studying Latin lately, and if you took Latin in high school, you've probably forgotten all of it, and you probably want me to translate for you what this album is saying, or what this particular title track to the album is saying. Well, first sentence, Ego sum esturientis, that just says, I'm hungry. You probably figured that out already. The tricky one is that next line, da mihi vestra frumentum, which literally means, give me your corn. But people who speak Latin these days, and there's only, I think there's nine of those people, they translate that more liberally, and so it comes out like, I want your taco, all right? So I am hungry, I want your taco. It's a really, really interesting record. For those of you who are more into the singer-songwriter, folky type of an act, there's a new one here by Hobson Grizzly. It's called My Refrigerator Stopped Working. And actually, most of the other songs on this CD are about other things that stopped working. For example, My Carburetor Stopped Working, and then My Lawnmower Man Stopped Working, so forth. This is an artist, if you will, who says a lot about forgotten people. And he is especially interested in inventors in the past. So, for example, I know from reading his recent Rolling Stone interview that he's very into Milburn Finkus, who invented fumigation. And if I remember correctly from something I saw online, he's also a big fan of Ditto Pumphouse, who was the inventor of the omelet, although that's disputed. Some people think the ancient Greeks invented the omelet. And you know, while I'm thinking about the ancient Greeks, let me just mention that, you know, when Donald Trump was stonewalling the Democrats and they wanted to hear testimony from people like, you know, Don McCann, well, the president said, okay, he can testify, but he has to answer your questions in ancient Greek. And that's really why the negotiations over his testimony broke down. I bet you didn't know that. Anyway, some of you like jazz. I know I do. And there's a great new record called Burp for Me by Canned Moose. This is a really visually arresting piece, as well as it's a very bumpy kind of a jazz thing. I would say that it almost has a kind of crustacean sound. You know what I mean? You don't. Okay. Well, anyway, it is that kind of jazz, and it takes things in a new direction. And what you probably don't know, even if you've been listening to Burp for Me for a while, is that this artist is not even a human type person. The artist is a potted plant. That's right. And this is a musician, I don't know if it's a he or a she actually, who is self-taught. Mostly on this new CD, he or she is playing a synth and accordion, but it is just different than any of the jazz you've heard in recent years. Now, one thing you're probably saying to yourself is, well, some artists like that obviously wouldn't need a big tour bus or something if they were going on tour. And in fact, Canned Moose is going on tour, but she does have a big truck. So there must be some things in the act that are too big to carry around by hand or to get the Uber driver to take over to the stage. You know what I mean? That's a joke about Uber drivers. I didn't get it either, but one of my assistants wrote that down. Anyway, before I leave the subject of music, there is also a new one by McDuck Sideburns, and it's called Shut Up and Eat Your Biscuit. Now, here's another case where I don't really know if McDuck Sideburns is a he or a she, because you never see a picture or even a biography of McDuck Sideburns. But a lot of other popular artists have said they were really influenced by McDuck. The Leather Bunnies say they did their first CD while listening to McDuck Sideburns as kind of a religious experience. And I think Hell's Hungarian Honeys said that they used to worship this music. They, like the hat fitters, they have one of those religions with a god with a silly name. And I think the instant commas also, anyway, whatever they did, they all said that McDuck Sideburns was very important. So that's the world of music. How about movies and TV? They reflect our society also. And I have to say that a whole lot of the current movies and TV specials are either spin-offs or knockoffs, or they want to sound like something that you already thought you liked. For example, a new TV series, Game of Loans, is going to be all about Donald Trump and his attempts to get money from various banks, including Deutsche Bank. So some of it will be in German and some of it will be in English. But this is, and it might be quite interesting. I mean, as far as I know, that could be a really interesting TV series. But the people who are responsible for it are already banking on side ventures. So they're creating a board game. Have you played Monopoly lately? I'm sure you did when you were a kid. And this new Game of Loans board game is a whole lot like Monopoly. You land on certain, for example, if you land on the square, bank says no way, sport, then you have to sell your yacht. Does that sound familiar? Did that happen to somebody you've heard of? I think so. Or you might land on another one that says, the casino went belly up, lose a turn. That's pretty clever if you ask me. I've been trying to figure out what that thing is up there in the corner, though. I recognize the messy office, but I don't know what that other machine is unless that's one of those new food products that is really non-food. I don't know. Another thing you might land on just says busted. Busted. Lose all credibility. Well, it seems like the president has already been there, done that, but he's still president, and the way he usually gets out of it, just like in this game, blame somebody. Blame somebody. And to make sure that this is real down to the last detail, you might land on go directly to the White House, collect $200 million from the inaugural committee. Now that's pretty thoughtful. So this board game, I think, is going to be just as popular as the TV show, because obviously the TV show is likely to last one season or less. I mean, how much can there be about, the negotiations with the banks? It was all bad news. And that's why I guess the president is currently stonewalling on producing any of those bank records, but you've just had a glimpse at what's really in there. There's another series, and I don't have a lot to say about it because there isn't a lot to say about it. It's another knockoff called The Game of Cones. Some of you who are into Zen Buddhism know that these are little aphorisms, little short sentence. And when some of the network executives saw the pilots, they showed them at a big theater, and there was only one hand clapping. So they went ahead and they shot a couple more pilots, but I don't think this is going anywhere. But meanwhile, the Game of Phones, now that has real potential because everybody is talking about it. And if you think about it, you've already been told by Facebook, by Google, by just about every Senate or House committee that your social media is dangerous because your phone is either recording everything you say, or it's taking pictures of you and sending them from here to there, or it's doing things that you don't even know it's doing. Huh? Isn't that right? And on that basis, we can say that the Game of Phones is going to be one of the most realistic shows on television. Now, it is said to be a fictionalized series, but from these previews I've seen, it looks like the real thing. For example, the guy who says you just went live on Facebook. Well, last week, I was live on Facebook. I was singing in the shower, but nobody was supposed to hear the song. It was a new hit record that I've been working on. But I was on Facebook Live, and I didn't push a button. My phone did it. You know what I'm saying? And other people have found out that, well, you know, bombs are going to go off, or somebody has a copy of something, or somebody is not wearing any underwear. That's what I'm saying. This is a realistic game, so I don't think it's even fiction. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Now, you may remember that one of the big TV productions of recent years was Breaking Bad. I don't need to explain that one to you. That was about some high school teacher who goes bad and becomes a drug dealer. Well, you've probably also seen baking shows, especially on public television, for example, where sometimes you see Martha Stewart cooking things, and sometimes you have people competing in contests to bake things. And this new show, Baking Bad, features some of the recipes that just didn't work out. Like that, you just saw the tortured red potatoes. I've tried those. I think they qualify as one of those new non-foods, and so does this punctured grapefruit. I just don't understand why somebody would bother with that. And then the pseudo-heavenly faux meteoric pellets with no hot sauce. That looks a whole lot like what my dogs eat. And of course, now my dogs are pretty well fed, but for goodness sake, they don't look like human food, and I guess that's why they call it Baking Bad. Okay, that much said. There's also a new feature. Now, you may recognize the Avengers movies. I haven't seen any myself, but they're capitalizing on that name, and coming soon is a new Revengers movie, End Zone. And this one is not about superheroes, but it's about superheroes. And I don't know if these superheroes are trying to get to the moon or trying to put plastic hamburgers on the grill. It's not clear to me, but you know, the movie will be in theaters fairly soon, so you'll get to find out just like I'm finding out. So that's what's going on the side of movies and TV. But you know, there's a whole other world out there. That's on the internet. And on the internet, you see all sorts of activity. For example, I saw this ad the other day, and you know, you see these marketing gimmicks all the time. Here's one from a guy saying he made $2.8 million doing mattress repair. Now, when I read that, I was thinking about my mattress, and I was thinking of what could go wrong with my mattress that I would need to be repairing. For example, I mean, it hasn't been in any mattress accidents. It hasn't been struck by asteroids. It hasn't been partially eaten by animals I can't identify. It hasn't been upended by violent weather like we're seeing in most of the country these days. Knock, knock. But anyway, this guy who says he made $2.8 million, I was doing a little research, and I am pretty well convinced that this is Damien Flosshuter, who wrote about making it big in Trump's America and how you could spend $65,000 a day to live like a king. And I'm not sure he's really making $65,000 a day, but he says he's making $2.8 million. If you want to try mattress repair, you go do it, but please report back to me, because I'd like to know what's really going on there. Well, that's not the only product or service on the internet these days. Here's another one, Voter Purge. This apparently is being sold as a detox, but not for the human body when you have the best stomach ache ever, but instead for cleaning up the electoral process without, leaving a trail of unwanted evidence. Did you notice that right down here, like so many products, it's got a disclaimer, and that disclaimer says, your results may differ, use only as necessary, as legal restrictions may apply in a few functioning systems of government. I'm not sure they're talking about ours anymore because our system doesn't seem to be functioning, and it looks like we've already had people using voter purge in the last so many elections already, since I was a boy or a voter or something like that. Another thing on the internet these days is GoFundMe. And I saw one the other day. This said, "Go fund my luxury hotel chain expansion." I think she meant expansion, but this lady claims to be setting up a chain of luxury hotels to compete with Donald Trump's hotels. Right now, it looks like she doesn't have anything but a few discarded pieces of furniture, so she needs a lot of help. And I saw a guy wanting to put a plastic ladder all the way to the moon to go up to the Trump Hotel on the moon. And he says that if you contribute to his GoFundMe page, that you can receive from him a pair of never-worn, lightweight Republican socks. I'm tempted to contribute to his little crusade just because I would like to see those socks. Let me just leave you one last thing from the internet. I don't know if this is true or not, because half the things on the internet aren't. But you've seen the Kentucky Derby go on and on and on for years now with riders on horses. And the coming thing is to have a Kentucky Derby where the horses don't bother to have any jockeys on them. They just race. And that sounds like such an interesting concept that apparently, according to this article I just saw in the Deep South Demonstrator, Google wants to enter its driverless cars, I suppose in the very same derby, to race against these horses that don't have any jockeys. So, as I said at the beginning, folks, I'm talking to sports fans and ceiling fans. And frankly, if you're a sports fan who's been bored lately, then maybe things are coming around for you. And if you're a Republican or a Democrat, all sorts of things are coming around to you. And if you like music, and if you like going to the movies, well, there's a whole lot that's coming to you. And I've told you many times, I'll tell you about it before anybody else does, as long as my folks can get the information and I can spin it to you. Until next time, enjoy whatever it is you were doing while you were watching this show, and keep right on doing it.
We're all entitled to a few mistakes. We're all entitled to some lucky breaks. But when you find yourself left sitting on a shelf,
just head for the land of tall women and virgin pines.
let bygones be bygones. This applies to men and